Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Sunday's Being Human Church service. This week, we are going to examine the idea of the American dream. And we're going to do this, obviously in America, we just had an election this last Tuesday. And election times are a really great opportunity for us to reflect on what it is that we are pursuing with our participation in our form of governance. And so uniquely in America, we have this idea of the American dream. And I don't know that most of us have a good understanding of what exactly that means, both to ourselves individually and then also us as a culture. And I think this is broadly applicable, not just within the American cultural context, but really in the Western economic and philosophical environment that most of the democratic-leaning countries belong to. And so for the American dream, I think a lot of people consider it as to have a house with a white picket fence, with a spouse and two kids and a dog, right? It's sort of a very commercial, tangible, materialistic ideal. And that grew out of the progression from the Great Depression through the end of World War II, and then the extraordinary economic and quality of life development that we saw, particularly in America. And it was the idea that you would be able to have more economic security than your parents, and that mostly equated to more stuff. You'd have a nicer house, you'd be able to put your kids into a better school, you'd be able to afford college for yourself and your children. And we've continued to progress on this line of we're able to afford, and do more commercial and materialistic things. And so that's the question is that the American dream? Is the American dream simply just to have enough physical stuff? Or is it something different? And I would propose that the American dream should really be more focused on having a meaningful life and doing meaningful work, and doing so in a time or in a way that gives you time with your family, and spending your time deliberately and having that flexibility, right? So it's the ability not just to have things so you're financially secure, but that you have the time and the ability to spend your time in ways that are meaningful to you. Because when you think about it, having material goods doesn't get us a sense of achievement. It doesn't get us a sense of purpose. It just means that we're not going to starve to death or freeze to death or be unhomed, right? It just instead could be something more focused on our ability to spend our life in a meaningful way. And of course, through the humanist perspective, that's a really good thing. So it's not about the house. It's not about the stuff. It's not about the status. It's really about achieving the dream of living a life well, right? A life well lived. And so that might actually mean the opposite of what the traditional American dream means, right? So it's not about a bigger house and more things. It might actually be a smaller house that's closer to where you work or where you spend most of your time, so that you're seeing your kids instead of commuting for an hour in each direction. Or it might be working in a job where you earn slightly less, but you're passionate about it and you're inspired by it, and you're not stressed out and worn thin by this work that doesn't give you meaning. So in today's world, which arguably is very much a world of plenty, we may need to make choices that change our perspective on what it is that we're pursuing. It's not about more money or more this or more that. It might just be spending time appropriately or having the ability to trade money for time. And so I think this is a really powerful idea, especially as we consider it in the recent context of voting. So what is it we're voting for, right? Arguably, we're voting for ways that we think it is going to be easier to achieve this American dream. And arguably, again, it's that dream of living a life well. So regardless of how you think that is best done, what are the key conditions that we need to bring about through our personal reflection, our voting, our engagement in the community to live a life well? So one of those things I would argue is environment. All right, I saw a post today on climate change. And that to me is a really important thing for us to consider, because regardless of what we do in our individual lives, and yes, we may feel powerless to change the speed with which the climate is changing, every little bit will count in the aggregate, because eventually it will get to a point where if we haven't done something, our little bits collectively, then it doesn't matter how hard we've worked individually for us and our family. The conditions won't support us living a meaningful life, because we'll be so focused on struggling for survival. The next piece is economy. So one of the things that we have to consider of what we're building when we're voting or engaging with our community is, what is the economy that we're building? Now, there are a bunch of different dimensions of economy, and I won't go into all of them, but between socialism and capitalism, centralized government versus decentralized government, all of those are ways to get after it. And throughout history, we've seen that the extremes tend to do pretty poorly, right? In terms of central management, you tend to have over-regulation and stifling of economies and potentially starvation of people. If you have extreme deregulation, you end up with extraordinary inequality and civil war. And so somewhere in the middle is probably right. And there's probably no one right answer for all of time. It's a continuing conversation and a recalculation of where we need to set our policies and governance to manage that. But the bottom line, the whole point of economy is, on one hand, to generate some excess, because excess is necessary as a human species to create progress. But on the other side, it's not to create so much excess and such inequality that most people are living in abject poverty and very, very few are living a life of extraordinary plenty. So there's something about the balance of those things that we have to agree on in a specific range. The next one is health, right? Whether it's the pandemic, the investment in general healthcare. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything, as the saying goes. So how have we established a healthcare system that actually provides the vast majority of people health and the ability to care for it? I would argue, especially in the American system, one of the reasons I think that we focus so much on monetary accumulation is because if you get sick, it costs an extraordinary amount to pay for it. And if that were mitigated in some way, and different countries do this better and worse, then it wouldn't be such a focal point for us. And those are policy decisions. Those are things that we vote for or do not. And the last piece that all of those together create, that's a key condition to live a good life, is stability. The balance of environment, economy, health, other things that we do are all about creating stability. Now, there are some people who, in the very American tradition, believe in the ideas of radical freedoms, that I can do whatever I want, which has never been the case. It's never been the case even when we lived in tribes. But they feel like they should be able to do whatever they want. The challenge is we're always balancing freedom with community, both of which are important. But the point is to arrive at a point of stability. Because if the economy isn't stable and there are people that cannot provide for themselves and their children, you're likely to have unrest. And that does not benefit the people that do have a lot. A lot of times, if you go back to the French Revolution, most of those people died that had a lot. And all of the resources they had didn't save them from the mass unrest that was created by the policies that they continued to entrench. On the other hand, spreading everything perfectly evenly where everyone has exactly the same means that there's no access to create progress, and the economy stagnates, and it tends to, everyone falls as a group. Plus, there's a fair amount of corruption there. So that stability is a key thing that we need to manifest when we're talking about what dream we are trying to bring into reality. Now, what might that dream actually look like? So having just spent the last few years in Europe, there are some really great things I think they have there, and things that we could manifest if it were something that we put our mind to. One of those things are walkable neighborhoods. I've seen even in America where they've started to build communities with mixed use, right? Where you have both residential and business in the same place, where you can walk to shops, but you can also live there. There are parks for children to play in and schools. And Europe was really built on this scale because it was built during the times where people walked or if they had a lot of money, rode a horse or a carriage. And so a walkable neighborhood is something that's a very human scale thing and can lead to having enough time, because you're not spending so much time in transport, enjoying the life and the family that you have. One of those things is public transportation that supports this idea. I found public transportation to be pretty phenomenal, especially when it's broadly used, well maintained. It's something that I think the Europeans take for granted because they have it, and we take for granted because most of us have never experienced it in America. But it's something that really lends itself to living a better life, because you're not spending such resources and time on having a car and then driving the car a bunch of places and maintaining this thing that you don't use 9/10 of the time. The next thing is just having basic needs met. Personally, I'm a big fan of things like a guaranteed basic income. And the reason is not because I believe in giving people money who aren't working for it. I think all of us agree that that is morally or ethically outrageous to us. But to me, it's more the practical effect. I want to make sure everyone is fed and clothed and sheltered, because that keeps our society stable. It prevents unrest. And I would rather us spend, to me, that's something that you're spending money that's a benefit to yourself, right? It's a fee for service. You're paying for the service of not having a lot of instability. And so, again, we have to balance all of those things with enough excess for progress. Things like the space program, to me, is something that's incredibly important in the long term of humanity, because eventually we're going to need some redundancy. We're going to have to be on this planet and another one to make sure that we survive in the very, very, very long run. So it's much like long-term investing. And then we have to think about things like representative elections. A friend of mine pointed out that Nevada enacted a bunch of changes to the way that they elect folks. One of those is ranked choice voting. And this is the methodology where you can rank order your favorite candidates. And if one of your candidates doesn't make the first round, basically, in immediately calculation, your vote then goes to the next person. So you're no longer worried about wasting your vote. And you can actually vote for the people who you prefer, as opposed to only voting against the people that you don't like, which is kind of how our system works today. And the last piece is less tangible, right? It's not about infrastructure. It's not about economy. It's not about policies. It's really about community. And community is something we build ourselves. It's the simple things like going to talk to your neighbor when you move in, or if somebody gets the wrong piece of mail, going and delivering it by hand and just saying hello. I heard someone today talk about, if you have some extra cookies that arguably many of us shouldn't be eating, can we just bring it next door and say, hey, I had some extra cookies. Just wanted you to have some. It's the small acts, and many of these acts have fallen by the wayside, especially during the last few years of COVID, where we have been separated from each other. And we need to really deliberately work to connect with the community around us, to build it deliberately. Because in today's world, it is too easy to be on our own, to be in our stereotypical American dream of our house is our castle, and we have our fence, and we don't need anything from anyone else, and we've got our own little family. I think it's important for us to realize that that is not true, that we all need a broader community, and that requires us to invest in it. And the investing oftentimes means getting out of the house, going to talk to people, even if it's uncomfortable. And we'll find that as we practice over time, it becomes more normal, and there's better connection, and the communities rely on each other, and they're actually able to accomplish something together. And so going back to this idea of the American dream and how it was focused on commercialism and materialism has driven people to work, especially in America, excessively, and not maintain that balance of what is important, of living a life of meaning, of spending time, as opposed to collecting money. There's a great saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And that, I believe, is really true. Because if we're only focused on work, we've forgotten the reason why we work. And that's the most important thing. And so to close, I would argue that the American dream is really something as simple as that tomorrow will be better than today, and that we work to make our children's future better than ours. And to me, there's nothing more humanist than that, because that's the core of what we believe, that humans can make the future better. So what I would ask you is, going forward for this week, spend a little bit of time to define what your dream is. What's your American dream? And then start to take action to live that dream. So thanks very much for tuning in this week. I appreciate it greatly. I hope this helps you to move forward, and I hope to see you again next week.